Schopenhauer didn't write for comfort, he wrote for clarity. His views on human nature, especially women, weren't designed to flatter. They were meant to reveal, not as gospel, but as a mirror, a brutal, uncomfortable, and often ignored reflection of instinct, strategy, and survival. In this episode, we go deep into what most men refuse to see, the darker psychological truths about women that society filters, softens, or outright denies. This isn't about bitterness, it's about awareness. Schopenhauer believed that men lose themselves when they misunderstand the nature of the opposite sex, when they project their ideals, ignore instinct, and refuse to observe what's actually happening beneath the surface. The truth may not be pleasant, but it will protect you. We'll break down his most controversial insights on manipulation, mating strategy, and why women's strength often lies not in physical force, but in emotional leverage. Whether you agree or not, the point is simple. Know the game you're playing or be played by it. So here's the question. Are you seeing women as they are or as you've been told they are? Let's find out. Welcome to the truth. Schopenhauer was never afraid to say out loud. Schopenhauer wasn't interested in illusions. He stripped away the social polish and looked straight at instinct. And one of the core truths he pointed out, harsh but undeniable, is that female manipulation isn't loud, it's subtle. And worse? In modern society, it's often rewarded. Manipulation in this context doesn't mean evil. It means strategic influence, using emotion, suggestion, and timing to shape outcomes. Women lacking physical power historically evolved to master soft power, tone, implication, social pressure, attention withholding. It's not always conscious, but it's incredibly effective, and most men miss it not because they're blind, but because they're hopeful. They want her words to be true, even when her behavior says otherwise. From "I didn't mean it like that" to "you're overreacting," to the strategic use of silence, vulnerability, or affection withdrawal, manipulation often wears the mask of innocence. The moment you question it, you're labeled controlling or insecure. So men back down, and by backing down, they train themselves to ignore the very behavior shaping their relationships. Schopenhauer saw this clearly. He warned that men often project logic and directness onto women, expecting actions to match words or motives to be clear. But that's not how emotional leverage works. A woman doesn't have to force you. She just has to influence you by changing the atmosphere, shifting the energy, or making you question your own judgment. The man who can't see this ends up led, not partnered. What's even more dangerous is that society often rewards this kind of influence. A woman who uses charm, plays the victim well, or frames herself as the misunderstood one often gains sympathy, attention, or protection. Meanwhile, the man responding logically, calmly, or even defensively, he's painted as harsh, cold, toxic. That imbalance is real, and it costs men silently. So what's the Stoic response? It's not aggression, it's awareness. You don't argue with manipulation. You recognize it. You don't explain your boundary, you hold it. You don't get baited into emotional battles, you watch, note patterns, and act accordingly. Not from fear, from clarity. Schopenhauer's warning wasn't to hate women. It was to understand female nature. And nature isn't kind. It's strategic. It adapts. And when you stop falling for the surface-level sweetness and start observing behavior beneath the words, you stop getting played and start leading with your eyes open. When men hear the term hypergamy, they often reduce it to a shallow stereotype. She just wants a guy with more money. But Schopenhauer and many thinkers after him saw something much deeper. Hypergamy isn't greed. It's strategy. It's instinctual. It's not emotional, and it's definitely not personal. It's simply how female selection evolved to optimize survival. At its core, hypergamy is the biological tendency for a woman to pair with a man of equal or higher status, socially, financially, physically, or mentally. Not because she's calculating like a spreadsheet, but because her instincts push her toward the strongest possible option for protection, resources, and legacy. Emotion might wrap it in romance, but underneath, it's selection pressure in action. Schopenhauer believed that most men fail in relationships because they confuse romantic ideals with biological drives. They assume loyalty is based on love, not leverage. But when a better opportunity appears, a more dominant frame, a more stable provider, a man with deeper self-command, hypergamy kicks in. Not always with cruelty, often with silence, rationalization, or emotional distancing. But it kicks in. This is why so many men feel blindsided when a woman suddenly loses interest. They think, "What happened? We were fine." But they weren't reading the metrics she was tracking. It wasn't just about how much you cared. It was about what you represented. Were you growing? Were you leading? Or were you comfortable, passive, or predictable? Hypergamy doesn't care about your potential. It responds to your current value. And this is why men who ignore it suffer the most. They get lazy, entitled, or too emotionally dependent, and then shocked when her desire fades. But Schopenhauer's solution wasn't bitterness. It was self-mastery. You don't fight hypergamy, you understand it, and then you surpass it by being the man who never stops evolving. A man grounded in Stoic principles won't resent female nature. He respects it. He sees that her drive to align upward isn't a flaw, it's a filter. And the best part? When you operate at a level where you're not competing, you're choosing, hypergamy becomes irrelevant. Because now, you're no longer hoping to be selected. You're the one setting the standard. So don't complain about the game. Just stop playing it like you don't know the rules. Grow, lead, protect your frame. Because when you live like a man worthy of selection, you stop fearing hypergamy and start making it work in your favor. Arthur Schopenhauer didn't sugarcoat. His views on women were controversial not because they were filled with hatred, but because they stripped away the fantasy most men wanted to believe. One of his core arguments? Women are far more strategic than men give them credit for. Not in the obvious ways, but in quiet, instinctual, long-game thinking that most men never see coming. To Schopenhauer, female nature was driven less by abstract ideals and more by concrete outcomes. While men are often impulsive, chasing beauty, drama, or passion, women, he believed, are wired for results. Not short-term fun, but long-term security. And their moves, whether conscious or unconscious, are geared toward preserving advantage, emotional, financial, or social. This strategy shows up in the subtleties. In how she tests your responses, frames a conversation, or controls timing and access without ever raising her voice. A woman might present herself as unsure, emotional, or passive. But that's often surface behavior. Beneath it, she's watching, weighing, and planning. Schopenhauer's point wasn't that this makes women manipulative, it makes them adaptive, and adaptation is a survival strength. The average man gets caught off guard because he takes everything at face value. He assumes directness, he assumes simplicity. But women operate in layers. They sense social dynamics, status shifts, power plays instinctively. That's not something to resent, it's something to understand, especially if you ever want to lead with awareness instead of confusion. Men often ask, why did she change, or where did the switch happen? The answer is, it didn't happen suddenly. It was building quietly. She read the room, she saw the pattern, and when the emotional cost outweighed the strategic benefit, she adjusted. You didn't lose her overnight, You missed the signs because you assumed she was moving like you. Schopenhauer wasn't telling men to become paranoid. He was telling them to observe, to stop living in the romantic delusion that women are less strategic or less driven by instinct. They are different, not weaker. And if you ignore their depth, their timing, and their ability to anticipate shifts in power, you'll always be reacting instead of leading. The Stoic response: stay calm, stay sharp, lead yourself first. Because once you respect the female instinct for strategy, not resent it, you move smarter. You stop projecting emotional simplicity onto something far more complex. And when you do that, you stop being a pawn and start moving like a man who finally sees the entire board. Power isn't always about dominance, volume, or physical control. In fact, some of the most effective power is invisible, subtle, quiet, and strategic. Schopenhauer understood this long before modern psychology caught up. Women don't need to overpower men to influence them. They use emotional leverage, and most men don't even know it's happening. Emotional leverage is the unspoken ability to shift outcomes through feelings instead of force. A woman can change the tone of a conversation, create tension, withhold affection, or use selective silence, all without saying a single aggressive word. Why? Because she understands the emotional temperature of a situation, and she adjusts it to her advantage. This isn't villainous, it's instinctual. Schopenhauer argued that women evolved to master indirect influence because direct confrontation wasn't always an option in historical power structures. So they refined more covert tools: attention, warmth, withdrawal, and timing. Tools that can manipulate without appearing manipulative. And here's the kicker: most men are emotionally reactive. They want clarity, certainty, and reassurance. So when a woman pulls away emotionally, subtly criticizes, or disrupts the emotional rhythm, they panic, they chase, they explain, they give up ground, and right there, that's where emotional leverage takes hold. Schopenhauer's warning wasn't that women are evil. It was that men are blind when they don't understand the emotional ecosystem they're in. When a woman stops talking, it's not always because she's done. It might be because she's testing. When she gets colder, more distant, or unusually sweet, ask yourself, not what's happening on the surface, but what dynamic is being shaped beneath it. The Stoic man doesn't react, he reads. He doesn't raise his voice, beg for answers, or chase clarity from someone who's changing the rules without saying it. He watches, he mirrors, he stays composed. And when he sees emotional leverage being used to manipulate rather than connect, he steps back, not emotionally, but strategically. Because once you see emotional leverage for what it is, it stops controlling you. You stop falling into guilt traps. You stop chasing coldness. You stop interpreting emotional turbulence as your responsibility to fix. Instead, you act with calm detachment. And women respect that more than any emotional performance. Schopenhauer's lesson was simple. Where words fail, emotion takes over. And whoever controls emotion controls the outcome. See it, respect it, but never let it rule you. Most men get it wrong because they start with ideals. They believe what they've been told, that women are naturally nurturing, emotionally pure, and relationship-driven by default. But Schopenhauer took a blade to that illusion. He argued that female behavior, like male behavior, is rooted not in fantasy but in instinct. And instinct doesn't care about your feelings. It cares about survival. Here's the hard truth. Women, like men, are not driven by moral purity. They're driven by advantage. And in their case, that often means security, status, and emotional fulfillment. Not in a calculated evil way, but in a deeply biological, deeply ancient one. Schopenhauer didn't blame them for it. He just demanded that men wake up to it. When you start from an idealized view of women, you fail to notice when instinct takes the wheel. You think she just changed, that she lost interest, that she's not acting like herself. But she is. She's acting exactly like someone whose instincts have determined that you're no longer the best option, or that you've become too comfortable to command respect. Men with ideal-based thinking tend to ignore patterns. They romanticize inconsistency, defend disrespect, and chase closure in situations where clarity has already been delivered through behavior. But instinct doesn't always speak in words. It shows up in emotional withdrawal, subtle comparison, increased testing, and ultimately disconnection. Schopenhauer's brilliance was in showing that this instinctual reality isn't negative. It's neutral. Just like gravity, it simply is. But men raised on ideals get crushed by it because they keep hoping, explaining, and blaming themselves when instinct kicks in. A stoic man doesn't. He observes it, accepts it, and adjusts accordingly. The masculine antidote isn't control, it's clarity. You stop expecting women to live by your ideals and start watching how they actually move, especially under pressure, change, or emotional uncertainty. And when you see instinct at play, you don't argue with it. You don't moralize it. You make a choice, engage or exit, but you do it with awareness, not delusion. In the end, Schopenhauer's challenge to men was brutal but freeing. Stop looking for a fantasy and start living in reality. Because only when you see her instincts clearly can you finally lead yourself honestly. Schopenhauer viewed female behavior through the lens of nature, not romance. And one of the most misunderstood truths he pointed to is this: women don't just choose based on attraction. They choose based on timing and transition. The man who excites her isn't always the one she commits to. And the shift from seduction to security reveals more about her instincts than her words ever will. In her early years, a woman's focus often leans toward seduction, toward experience, drama, validation, and exploration. She may chase excitement, novelty, or the man who gives her emotional highs and lows. This isn't manipulation, it's nature. Schopenhauer would argue it's the expression of hypergamous instinct in its raw form. Test, seek, select. But over time, something shifts. As stakes rise, age, reputation, emotional exhaustion, her selection process changes. The priority moves from thrill to stability, from intensity to certainty. That's when men who were once overlooked suddenly seem mature, stable, or husband material. Not because they changed, but because her needs did. This switch isn't spoken, it's felt. You'll notice how women stop chasing the bad boy and start considering the man with a frame, a future, and a plan. She's no longer seduced by chaos. She's repelled by it. Not because she regrets her past, but because her instinct has evolved toward preservation. The mistake many men make: they try to be both, seductive and stable, unpredictable and safe, but in doing so, they often confuse themselves and the women around them. A stoic man doesn't chase one mode, he becomes centered. He builds a life that's ordered, disciplined, and high value, so whether she's in her seduction or security phase, he remains the standard. Schopenhauer's insight wasn't that women are deceptive, it's that they are adaptive. Their choices aren't always about you. They're about timing, life stage, and the quiet psychological shifts that influence selection. If you don't understand this, you'll take rejection personally and commitment as a compliment. Neither is fully true, so understand this. Female choice isn't random, it's strategic. From seduction to security, a woman's instinct is constantly evaluating. Not just how you make her feel, but what future you represent. And once you stop trying to play a role and start embodying a mission, You'll stop getting selected accidentally and start getting chosen intentionally. You've just uncovered the layers most men never see, the strategic, instinctual, and often unspoken truths Schopenhauer laid bare. Not to shame women, but to wake men up. Because if you don't understand how female psychology actually works, from emotional leverage to hypergamy, you won't just lose time, you'll lose yourself. This isn't about fear or control, it's about clarity. Clarity that protects your energy, sharpens your standards, and ends the cycle of being confused by what's always been predictable once you start seeing it for what it is. So here's your challenge. What's one truth in this video that you felt because you've lived it? Drop it in the comments. No filters, just facts. And if this truth hit different, subscribe to Grim Life Chronicles, because the moment you stop idealizing is the moment you start leading.